Imagine getting a serious infection with no doctor, no pharmacy, and no idea what a germ even is. This was the reality for every human who lived before about 100 years ago. For almost all of human history, when you got sick, there was no hospital to go to and no pill to take. So what did they actually do? The answer is not what most people assume. We tend to imagine our ancestors as helpless, dying in the dark, clueless about their own bodies, but that picture is wrong. Ancient humans were running something we never give them credit for. They were conducting the longest and most brutal medical experiment in the history of the species, and some of the treatments they discovered are sitting in your medicine cabinet right now. Let's start with the single most important thing in ancient medicine: plants. Long before anyone understood chemistry, humans figured out that certain plants did something to the body. The most famous example is willow bark. For at least 4,000 years, across Sumeria, ancient Egypt, and ancient Greece, people chewed willow bark or brewed it into a bitter tea to bring down fever and dull pain. The Greek physician Hippocrates recommended it around 400 BCE. Nobody understood the mechanism. They only had the result repeated enough times to trust it. It took until 1828 for scientists to isolate the active compound in willow bark, a substance called salicin. And in 1897, a chemist at the Bayer Company in Germany refined it into a slightly gentler version and gave it a brand name. He called it aspirin. The painkiller in your bathroom is a polished version of something humans were using before the pyramids were built. And willow bark was just one entry in a pharmacy that stretched across the entire ancient world. Ötzi the Iceman, the 5,300-year-old body found frozen in the Alps, was carrying a pouch of birch fungus when he died. Modern analysis showed that birch fungus has anti-parasitic properties, and Ötzi's gut was infected with parasitic worms. He wasn't carrying it by accident, he was carrying his medicine. But plants were only the beginning, because ancient humans also understood something about wounds that took modern medicine a shockingly long time to rediscover. They used honey. Across ancient Egypt, Greece, China, and Mesopotamia, healers packed open wounds with honey, and it worked. Honey draws water out of bacteria and kills them, and it forms a protective seal over the wound. This isn't folklore. Medical-grade honey is used in hospitals today to treat burns and wounds that won't heal. The Egyptians wrote honey wound dressing recipes on papyrus more than 3,000 years ago, and a modern wound care nurse would recognize what they were doing. Then there's the strangest one. In several ancient cultures, healers treated infected wounds by packing them with moldy bread. To us, that sounds like a good way to make an infection worse. But certain molds produce compounds that kill bacteria, and one of those molds is penicillium. Thousands of years before Alexander Fleming discovered penicillin in 1928, ancient healers had stumbled onto a crude version of the same thing. The explanation was beyond them, but the pattern wasn't. This particular mold, on this particular kind of wound, sometimes saved a life, and that was enough to keep doing it. Now here is where the story turns dark, and also where it gets remarkable, because ancient humans didn't just treat illness with plants and honey. They cut into the body. The oldest form of surgery we have evidence for is called trepanation, and it means drilling or scraping a hole into a living person's skull. We have found trepanned skulls on every inhabited continent, some of them more than 7,000 years old. Healers did this to treat head injuries, seizures, crushing headaches, and what they believed were evil spirits trapped in the head. And the truly astonishing part is that people survived it. We can tell because the bone around the hole shows signs of healing, which only happens in a living body over weeks and months. In some ancient populations, the majority of trepanation patients lived. Think about what that means. Without anesthesia, without antiseptics, without any understanding of infection, ancient surgeons were opening human skulls, and their patients were walking away and living for years. They were better at this than they had any right to be. So how did they learn all of this? There were no medical schools, no textbooks, no journals. The answer is the part of the story that should change how you think about your ancestors. They learned it the hardest way imaginable, by watching people die over and over for thousands of years and remembering what happened. A person with a fever chewed willow bark and got better. So the next one tried it too. The wound packed with honey healed, while the wound left open turned black and killed its owner. Every remedy that worked was discovered through the deaths of the people it didn't save in time. Ancient medicine was a vast, slow, unrecorded clinical trial paid for in human lives, with the results passed down by word of mouth from healer to healer across hundreds of generations. The knowledge lived in people, not in books. A village healer carried in their head decades of accumulated trial and error, much of it learned from the healer who taught them, who learned it from the healer before. When that person died, some of that knowledge could die with them. This is part of why ancient medicine advanced so slowly. The library was made of human memory, and human memory is mortal. But there is one last thing ancient humans understood about being sick, and it's the thing we may have lost. When you were ill in the ancient world, you were not alone. You couldn't be. You lived surrounded by your group, in close quarters, with people who had known you your entire life. When you fell sick, they gathered around you, brought food and water, and stayed close. The healer came, often as much a spiritual figure as a medical one, and performed rituals, sang, applied remedies, and gave the sick person something that mattered as much as any herb. The sense that the whole group was fighting the illness alongside them. Modern medicine would call this the placebo effect, and the documented power of social support on recovery, and both are real and measurable. Patients who feel cared for and connected genuinely heal faster. Ancient humans didn't have the studies, but they had the instinct. Healing was something the group did together, not something that happened to one person alone. Now think about how we do it. You get seriously sick today, and in many cases you go to a clean, bright building full of strangers, and you are treated by people who have never met you and will forget your name by the next shift. The medicine is extraordinary beyond anything an ancient healer could have dreamed of. A single modern antibiotic could have saved more lives than every village healer in history combined. But you often recover alone, in a quiet room, scrolling on your phone, waiting to be discharged back to an empty apartment. Your ancestors had almost nothing to fight illness with, and no real understanding of why anything worked. Most of their serious illnesses were death sentences, and they buried their children at rates that would break us. They would have traded everything they had for one bottle of the pills you keep in a drawer and forget about. But they had one thing we are quietly losing. When they were at their most frightened and their most fragile, somebody was always there. The fever and the wound and the fear were faced by the whole group at once. And maybe that's the strangest part of this entire story. We finally learned how to cure the body after 300,000 years of trying. And somewhere along the way, we forgot the oldest medicine of all, the one that costs nothing, and that every ancient human understood without being told. Nobody should be sick alone.